Thank you. Well, thank you all very much. We're now moving on to a panel on space tech meets digital deep tech. It seems a little bit out there, literally, but of course the technologies that we're seeing deployed day to day in our daily lives are actually, often cases, very reliant on the satellites above our heads. So whether that's mobile phones or car navigation systems, satellite TV, whatever it may be, we will try and bring it back down to the everyday level. Up to now, space investment has traditionally been by government agencies, and those generally also being from the wealthiest nations. But we're seeing increasing use cases and more application use cases. So that means that there's a little bit more interest now from private investment into potentially deep space tech. So please, if I would invite my panelists to join me on stage, and if we can get the slide up with everyone's names, it'll help us all find our seats more easily. But please welcome to the stage, please, Professor Tschirhart, who is a special advisor, and to the rector at UNIVERSEH, European University. Eugenia Forte is the project director and Takeoff Accelerator. Leopold is the head of advanced concepts team at the European Space Agency. And Marco Brancati is the chief technical and innovation officer at Telespazio. So thank you all very much for being here. So I'm going to open with a general question to everyone. What is space tech and where is Europe? Not literally where is Europe, but where are we at in Europe in terms of our space tech abilities? And Eric, perhaps I'll get you to start.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me today. I'm very happy. In a nutshell, the question of space tech and digital in Europe is something which is a bit aside from itself. If you look about space, most of space technology is old. It's almost dinosaur technology. Probably you will never go to space with your ice watch or your Samsung connected watch because it's too young and it's not tempered. And on the other side, we are in a situation where space tech is absolutely at the most of technology in terms of resilience. And I guess that it's something which is extremely important because moving space tech and digital world at the moment is something which is absolutely crucial because digital is giving you speed and knowledge, and we have students who are interested in AI. I'll show you a bit of example later on. And in terms of space tech, it's something which has to be resilient because in terms of communication, when you end up with a failing launch, it's a bit of a bad publicity, to say the least. And if you can go to the next slide, please, that would be of help for me. Except for the dinosaurs that I would like to complete, is that as a European university, we try to address these problems. Now, if you just look at the bottom line of the slide, what we are doing now in terms of space tech and digital, we are training people. We are developing training and skill acquisition for the youngest in Europe in terms of space. This means knowledge, this means skills also, and people were talking about reskilling beforehand, which is important. We are also looking at vocational education in space. This means that space has a sort of long-term, 15 or 20 years of development scheme, which is an issue in terms of industry also. And we have a number of challenges because we have new species in the human race, unfortunately. This is what we call digital natives. These guys are relatively young. It's called Generation Y and Z, and they don't think like us. They were almost born with a digital machine in their lungs or heart. They are using it very rapidly, but not forcibly the way that you think would be usable for their work, for their studies, for their knowledge acquisition, or for something which is of importance for work. They are linked essentially to what I call immediacy. They need an answer immediately. A little story is that in terms of education, we try to tackle the concept of AI, which is very difficult. Just a little story. A week ago, we were setting up the exam in physiology because I teach physiology in medical school. They asked me, can we use ChatGPT for our official assessments? And I said, yes, of course, you can use it, but you will get very harsh questions. This is the deal. And they came to me 2 days later and said, well, actually, we changed mind. We just want to stick to the course and have normal questions because we don't know how ChatGPT is working correctly or not. So this is something which is also doubtful for them. We also try to use VR. This is called virtual reality for students. It's something which is really important for them. And I guess that we are in a situation where space tech and digital is absolutely complementary in this case. The question that's on the next slide, which is not absolutely settled for now, is do we know if this is something which is a stairway to heaven? I'm not sure. I know that digital is of importance for space. We believe that it is something which is of interest for many. But again, it is open for discussion.
Well, thank you. The last slide was just a thank you slide on Stairway to Heaven, I think. Eugenia, let me turn to you and ask you, do we have a space startup sector yet?
This is a good question. So first of all, thank you for the invitation and nice to meet you all. I manage an aerospace accelerator and I work in a venture capital firm. So before replying to your question, I want to go back to your first question because it was quite interesting. Like, what is space? I would like to reflect on this. All of you are using a smartphone. All of you probably use Uber or Google Map. Like, what is space economy? It's like everything. I know it can sound a little bit fancy to say, but it's really everything. There is this sometimes bias, like people think that the space economy impacts only in the aerospace sector, but I don't agree with that. You can, you use satellites data and you use a lot of information for air monitoring, whatever, thanks to our space new technologies. So going back to your question, this is a great period for creating a startup in the aerospace sector because the increasing number of venture capital firms in the space sector, but also of tenders from government, and the collaboration between public and private sector is really creating the best moments, probably, to create a startups. There are funds, there are opportunities, and I can see a lot of innovation right now. So. We invested last year in 10 aerospace startups, so I mean software and hardware. I was surprised there are lots of startups in the hardware sector. I was really surprised. I believed that the downstream startups were a lot, but I discovered that the upstream startups, more hardware-related startups are a lot. And there is a lot of interest, also the space sector is connected to national security and a lot of topics. So I think this ecosystem is quite great. And think about that in the last 3-4 years, maybe 5 aerospace VC firms were created. And that's surprising, and this is a good year for that.
Thank you. Leopold, I know you have a slide ready to take us through the ESA, so perhaps we could have a look at that now and then give us your introduction.
Yes, I think to answer your question, yes, we have in Europe a very vibrant space sector and a very vibrant startup space sector in all ESA member states and European Union member states, by the way. There are really innovative startups. But in general, we have in space in Europe a situation that is remarkably different from what we heard this morning on the supply chain issues with the chips. Because we have in Europe a very competitive dynamic space industry that has all the supply chain within Europe. We have very little dependencies, and that is maybe because of the fact that within the space ecosystem in Europe, we have kept an industrial policy right since the 70s. And even when industrial policy was a no word in many of the economic orthodoxy 15 years ago, in the space sector, we kept an active industrial policy that allowed us now to have a very dynamic, competitive space sector. Now, is it all rosy? No, because we are underinvesting massively in space. And this chart that you see up there is showing the public investments in space in 2022, civil and military together, and you see that 60% of all public investment is done in the US, and only 14% in Europe. Clearly, the Chinese and Russian space budgets are structurally underrepresented there because of publicly available data issues. But what we see there is this underinvestment in Europe, which creates an issue. It creates an issue for European industry, for European startups, because the US market is so much more attractive than the European market, because the public is investing so much more into getting what it needs to get out of space. And one might argue that, well, the US, they just have more ambitions in space, and therefore space in Europe is maybe a little bit in the corner and doesn't help us achieving our policy objectives. But the contrary is true. I mean, space is essential to achieving our sustainability goals. It is space that provides all the essential data to understand our model of the climate, the model how the Earth works, and therefore, when our current Director General came into office 2 years ago, he put forward what is called an ambition agenda, a growth agenda, saying we in Europe, we need to benefit from space as much as the US, China, Japan, and others are benefiting from space. So clearly, we are not providing the competitive European industry with the same framework in order to benefit from space, in order to allow us to benefit from space as much as it should.
Thank you. And I'm going to do a plug for my own podcast. It's being launched next week with the ESA. We're talking about, it's called Let's Talk EU Space, and we'll be focusing primarily on Copernicus, but you'll find out everything else about the ESA over the 10 following weeks, I hope. Marco, turning to you, a slightly different question. What is Telespazio? Not what is SpaceTech, but tell us about your company.
So at first, let me say thank you for the invitation. I fully share what has been highlighted up to now, just as a very preliminary overview of situation concerning the development of new technologies and investment in space. So actually, Telespazio is a service provision company. So we are not a manufacturing one, but we provide services. And in the typical organization of a space system where we talk about the upstream, which is made by the space segment, the midstream, which is made by the ground infrastructure, and the downstream, which is relevant to the provision of services, we are involved in the second and the third one. So what is relevant to the ground infrastructure to provide the services, and actually to provide the services while operating the ground infrastructure that allow that. So it is clear that on one side, since we as a service provider are very close to the needs of the users, In that respect, we are able to provide always also the partner companies that provide the development of the space segment with the needs coming from the users. On the other side, of course, we need to optimize and utilize the new technologies in order to provide services in always in a more efficient and, let me say, a fruitful way for the customers. So, on one side, it is we look at a world which has been defined a little conservative in terms of technologies, but we can definitely take advantage of technologies which were not born for space to be utilized in our environment. By the way, as shortly pointed out by Eugenia, let's remember that nowadays the fallbacks of what has been tested and utilized in the space on the daily life is incredibly wider than what the single person not really involved in this environment could imagine. This is for sure. And by the way, a service company, probably even more than what is needed for a manufacturer one, needs to follow the new trends. For instance, Telespazio, although it was established more than 60 years ago, I like to say that it still moves as a startup or a scale-up, let's say. Because, for instance, we followed all the historical steps of this industry. For instance, the very first time that the original father of Internet came to Europe, it came through the infrastructure that Telespazio is space teleports. For instance, we have been involved in the development of the very first constellation in the world, which gave the possibility to be reached everywhere in the world. I'm referring to the Iridium constellation, the Iridium system, and then the Iridium services. Galileo is something that is controlled in terms of constellation by two different control centers, two facilities, and one is in our Fusion Space Center, the other one is in Oberpfaffenhofen in a joint venture together with the DLR. So always looking at that. And nowadays we took advantage of the last updates concerning digitalization. So the possibility not to have anymore the ground infrastructure physically located in one side, but thanks to the digitalization, to have the different components of the ground segment located in a virtual way or wherever they are really needed. Or, for instance, the utilization of artificial intelligence in order to optimize something that we usually do, which is the operations of satellites, how to handle the satellites that are assigned to us from third parties, or also the cybersecurity requirements, which now need to be implemented more and more to make a safe space segment. This is something that we are let me say, implementing as much as possible, still keeping ourselves always on the edge of the frontier on the basis of what we can reutilize from technologies not born for space, but in our environment.
Well, I think you've listed quite a few things, but let me try and break it down to, if you like, two broad types. There's space for Earth applications and space for space applications, which continually happen in orbit. I mean, is one area more ripe for innovation than the other, Eugenia?
Okay, this is a good question. I have, of course, my personal opinion. Like, okay, if we talk about long future, of course, all the topics related to the space tourism and whatever are really fascinating. But focusing on present time, for sure, like we send a lot of data to the Earth, and our technologies, like our current technologies, need to be improved in order to be able to receive all of these data, because they are processed, and we are not right now completely capable of capturing all the data. So, for example, I think that the edge computing is space for analyzing, collecting data, and analyze data directly into the space, for example, and then send down to the Earth those data is an interesting technology for sure. So this is the first one. And of course, there is a lot of interest in the space debris because, now the situation is pretty much different. Fortunately, the price of rockets and new components, thanks to the new technologies, is decreased. That means that we send more satellites. And for example, I don't remember exactly, but in the last decades, there were 11 Earth observation commercial satellites, and now there are 500. So what does it mean? We launch more, and we are democratizing this sector, fortunately, so this is something we need to be happy. But launching more means space debris. There are more than 128 million space debris smaller than 10 millimeters, in our orbiting in our planet. And of course, there is a risk of collidence. So that's why basically I think that this is an interesting sector. So all the startups who are working to avoid, predict, or at least identify space debris are really interesting also because our current technologies are more related to telescopes and radar, but in order, if you want to discover space debris, you need to know where it is. So again, we are in the same situation. So basically, edge computing, space debris are two of the examples, but
we'll be talking.
There is more. I can talk for hours about this. So.
Well, space pollution. We get very alarmed when we see pollution in our oceans, but I guess we can't see it in space, so it gets overlooked. But you're identifying opportunities, and Eric, I want to talk to you about how do we develop opportunities? How do we collaborate? Is it collaboration? Is it the space innovation clusters? What's the way to drive this forward and take advantage of opportunities that might be there?
I think that there are different solutions or different clusters of opportunities. The first ones are probably linked to the youngest people. They are able to identify solutions of economic development because they follow log hackathons in space. They look at how data can be used. Most of them now, they are engineers initially they are engineers, but they do understand that space is changing toward this new space, which is more economic driven. Probably space was 100% publicly funded. Now it's changing in terms of business model. And definitely they understand that, from a downstream segment, so data which comes from space and to be used on the Earth as a commercialization solution, there are opportunities in terms of company and economic development, pending the fact that there is an issue in terms of security of data coming down, and that they can be economically valorized. This is the first set of opportunities that I would like to stress on, because these people, they do understand the new economy of space. The second point is probably the followers. They are a bit more mature. They understand what could be the advantage of using space from a downstream perspective, from satellites to Earth, on a more conservative way. This is essentially linked to traffic management, for example. There are many people in logistics who are taking some opportunity in this sector. And the third category, the third cluster of opportunities are the long-term thinkers. They are dreaming about deep space. They are dreaming about settlements. They are dreaming about moon, about Mars. Not solely Trump, not solely SpaceX. There are others who are, the environment is completely bubbling in this context. Just to give you an example, 2 weeks ago I was in Krakow in Poland, and for a number of reasons we organized a space hackathon over there with Ukrainian students, because they did not have the opportunity to come to Luxembourg at some point. And they were absolutely fantastic in finding new solutions for settlements on the moon or on Mars. When I talk about settlements, this considers, sort of GPS constellation around the moon or about Mars. This concerns also circular economy, how we are going to live in a settlement outside of Earth. How are we going to interact? This calls psychology, and even goes to a political system. Is it going to be a space tech-driven society? Is it going to be a completely libertarian society also? So it's something which is absolutely comprehensive in terms of opportunity, bearing the fact that it's a 15 years potential option for these people. Interestingly enough, if you look at the way of the amount of money which is raisable in the 3 different opportunities that I described, the first one is really straightforward. You can find VCs with Series A, Series B investment. But the one who has the most dreamers, the third category, so the ones who wants to go to the moon or to Mars, they are able to leverage money in a very substantial amount. This is absolutely incredible, but they make people dream, and they also make the investors dream, which is absolutely key in this context, because even if the valuation at the start is quite minimal, the potential valuation of these future companies with a 15-year objective as a roadmap until 2035, they are able to leverage a quite important amount of money. If I answer your question. Yeah. Not completely, but partially.
Marco, did you want to add something?
No, I know that he has something to add.
Go ahead.
Okay. No, I like very much the topic addressed because currently one of the most severe challenges we are involved in as a service provisioning company is to act in order to make what has been described possible. Actually, again, there is in Europe there is a program handled by ESA that has exactly that target, to put in place a constellation around the moon in order to allow this so declared lunar economy to really grow. And of course, the constellation has to provide telecommunication and navigation services for the users of the lunar surface, so the landers, the rovers that will be over there. And in order to start up such a circular economy, so the technologies that we today have on the Earth can be applied over there. And this is going to attract actually the investments, the private investments, that probably up to now were not so huge in our environment, but not only from companies being involved in space, but from non-space companies. This is absolutely interesting, because companies interested in drilling, companies interested in transforming materials, companies interested in automotive, for instance, okay, they are looking at these possibilities as a way to enlarge their portfolio of opportunities. And of course, for the space companies, on the space companies stays the challenge to make all of that possible. And so this is something that really allows to say, going to the question that you made to Eugenia, whether there are efforts in the space for the Earth or in the space for the space. I'd say that there are both, of course. For what concerns space exploration, there is clearly the need to develop something in the space for developing the economy in the space. especially if we really want to move from the moon also to Mars and to test the possibility of enlarging the presence of mankind outside the Earth.
Follow that, Leopold.
Yes, I actually don't like the distinction space for the Earth.
From Europe to the US. There is a very easy solution to bring people back. It's just to change the compensation scheme in Europe. If you give peanuts to people, they don't stay. If you change the compensation scheme in Europe, in technology, in STEM in general, and also in everything which is related to valorization of economy in general, people will come back, or at least they will stay. If we don't make this change in paradigm, people will go to the US. They will go where the compensation scheme is competitive. I've been in the US. You are kicked in the ass every morning. We have to change our paradigm in this context in Europe. And this is my last word.
Well, thank you very much. I think that's our secret sauce for how we breed the next European Elon Musk. I'm contractually obliged to say Elon Musk at least once every panel. So